Lester, good evening. This neighborhood where rescues are happening nonstop flooded more than 10 feet in areas in mere hours. An example of the disaster and its fury. It is a colossal rescue effort. Thousands stranded, taken by boat and helicopter.
Water's so high, the boats are going over the top of the cars.
Saved using anything that floats. Their faces tell the story of anguish, anxiety, and fear.
The water was up to here. I walked out and I was just like screaming. I seen somebody, they tried to put us on air mattresses. It didn't work. They had to put the babies on air mattresses. People were carrying babies on their shoulders.
With emergency responders overwhelmed, Houston Mayor Sylvester Turner is asking people to call 911 only if their life is in danger, as he defended his decision not to issue a mandatory evacuation order.
But I want to thank those thousands, in fact, millions of Houstonians who heeded the advice and did not get on the road.
The city has now opened its convention center for evacuees as rescue teams plead for the public's help.
Those of you who have boats and high water vehicles that can be used in neighborhoods to help move people out of harm's way, we need your help.
And Houstonians have responded en masse.
You know, if they need my help, I'm going to do what I can.
Back in southeast Houston, Frank Pena woke up surrounded by water.
All the beds, everything, furniture.
All gone.
All gone, everything's gone.
He moved into this apartment just 3 days ago. His neighbor upstairs took him and 3 other families in. Are you going to stay until the water goes away?
Might. Probably not if they come get us. We need help. A whole bunch of families displaced, has lost everything.
The Morales family lost nearly everything, including their stove and much of their food. You can't eat your food. This bayou is usually nearly empty. Within a matter of hours, it's 30 feet overflowing into these apartments, and all these people are trapped. While scrambling to save her mom from floodwaters in a nearby city, Samantha caught on a flooded interstate herself, climbing to safety.
My mom, she said that like there's water going in there. It's like 3 inches deep. Thought I could make it to the other side. But I didn't think it was that deep.
America's 4th largest city fighting to survive a still unfolding calamity.
You spent most of your life in this city. Explain what you're seeing through your eyes with that personal connection.
It's my hometown. It's hard to see, especially here, the pain and the suffering. It rains and storms here often, but never quite like this. But I'm encouraged watching Houstonians help each other come together, and I'm confident that no matter what comes next, they'll do just that. Lester?
Yeah, and I got a chance to see some of that, Jacob, a bit earlier. We'll show that later in the broadcast. Thank you.
Good evening. Thanks for joining us for this special edition of World News Tonight this Monday. I'm Tom Yamas, in for David. And tonight, Greater Houston remains paralyzed, a region of 6.8 million people sheltering in place as the flooding disaster unfolds. And just behind me, you can see downtown Houston. This is the Buffalo Bayou, but you can't tell where the bayou ends and the downtown starts. For a third brutal day, torrential rain, people rescued from flooded homes, volunteers with boats pitching in. But tonight, the storm claiming even more lives. The river still rising, and this dangerous development, 2 reservoirs threatening to spill, and new mandatory evacuations underway. Tonight, there have been more than 4,000 high water rescues. More than 30,000 people are now expected in shelters, and 12,000 Texas National Guard members have been called up. That's every service member who is available to serve. Tonight, the city is sending out an urgent call for medical professionals, and the storm is growing even stronger.
Tonight, new evacuations and fears the death toll will rise across America's 4th largest city.
There is a reality that we have to come to grips with, and that is we are just beginning the process of responding to this storm.
What started with a direct impact on the tiny coastal town of Rockport on Friday night has turned into a weather disaster affecting thousands of square miles and millions of people. More than 39 inches of rain already in spots and more on the way. Officials releasing millions of gallons from the Addicks and Barker reservoirs, hoping to prevent a catastrophic dam failure. but the water inundating neighborhoods, forcing thousands of residents from their homes.
We had to leave some people behind, which is really, really tough in these situations. They can't sit in these homes anymore with this water rising. Thousands rescued by boat, more than 300 by helicopter.
This is the water.
Aisha Nelson stranded with her children on her roof.
It's water everywhere. We have nowhere to go. And I have all my children. I lost everything. I have nothing but the clothes on my back. Please help us. I'm scared.
Hours later, finally rescued.
To give you an idea of how paralyzed Houston is right now, take a look at this. The public transportation system frozen. This is a line of city buses. It stretches as far as the eye can see behind me and all the way in front of us.
The Texas governor now activating all 12,000 members of the National Guard. Emergency responder frequencies overwhelmed.
There are 2 adolescent boys in kayaks that are missing that cannot swim, along with a family of 3 that's stuck in high water.
Houston's own citizens are stepping in to help save each other.
You help us out here. We're just going to go under this overpass and around the corner.
Along the highway, we met a driver who took us to a flooded out neighborhood where a woman was stuck in her home. The ceiling starting to buckle. Her family asking for help on social media.
Did you see a house with the roof collapse?
We find the home and the part of the roof starting to cave in. The woman, Sonara Reason, displaced by Hurricane Katrina, now dealing with Harvey.
I don't know. I've been through so much, so I really don't know. I mean, I'm a war veteran, so this is a bad joke for me right now.
But she refuses to go to the shelter. She doesn't want to leave her pets behind. In another part of Houston, the Bel Air section, 2 brothers are working around the clock to save their neighbors.
You can't see if it's a foot or 10 feet.
We told them about a woman we heard was trapped. They jumped into action, taking us right to the home.
Yvette!
Inside, there was water everywhere.
This is your home?
Yeah, it's our home. And these are our neighbors, Yvette and James, and one of our boys is here, and I'm going to start crying and be like an idiot.
It's painful. They now have to abandon a home they've lived in for 25 years with only what they can carry.
We feel still very fortunate. We're happy for your help. We're happy to get out, though.
And Sierra Lee thanking first responders who helped her get to the hospital while she was in labor, writing, Landon Jared was born perfectly healthy at 3:30 p.m. on August 27th.
And that mother telling us she never got the name of the people who saved her, but she will always be.
Hi, everyone. I'm Rena 9, and it has been a long day in southeast Texas. Harvey, dumping so much rain, entire communities have been overwhelmed. Streets have been turned into fast-moving rivers. Homes in Houston and the surrounding area are flooded up to their attics, and thousands remain trapped. At least 2 people are dead, but that toll is expected to rise. And that's because crews have not yet been able to get to some of the hardest hit areas. There have already been up to 2,000 rescues in the Houston area alone, some by emergency crews, some just by neighbors, helping neighbors. Over 2 feet of rain has fallen just in the last 24 hours. By the time it's all over, up to 50 inches of rain may fall, and that is historic for the city of Houston and the entire state of Texas. That's the amount of rain they typically get in a year. And officials warn that the worst may be yet to come. The storm isn't going anywhere. The rain may last until Thursday. And there are also tornado warnings in effect across the region. So far, 18 counties in Texas are included in a federal disaster declaration, representing a quarter of the state's population. And there are more than 250 highway closures across the state. There are at least 338,000 power outages. And the Red Cross says they are serving 130,000 meals a day in the area to those displaced by the floods and by the initial impact of the storm. CBS News correspondent Mark Strassman is in Houston. Mark, tell me, the National Weather Service says the rainfall is, quote, beyond anything they've experienced before. Can you describe for us what it's like out there right now?
Well, here's the good news, Rena, at least for those of us who are in Houston, it stopped. I mean, it stopped at least temporarily. There's a lull right now. There have been very few lulls over the last 36 hours or so here. I drove into the city last night, pounding rain, woke up this morning, pounding rain, and there's a lot more pounding rain in the forecast. If you look at the radar, pounding rain all the way at least through Wednesday. And so these people essentially know that as bad as it is, I think, as you just mentioned, it is going to get worse. There's no question about it. People whose homes are flooded, neighborhoods flooded, those homes are going to get worse because as the forecast has predicted, you're going to have all kinds of folks who need help. They've been trying to find high, dry ground wherever they can. And in some cases, that includes like going up to the attic, which is not always necessarily a great idea because if the floodwater rises, you've got no place to go unless you remember to bring an axe to go through to the roof. So lots of problems, lots of challenges here. But Rena, they think that they have enough resources to kind of get in place to respond to these challenges, but they know that there are a lot of challenges still to come.
Certainly a lot of challenges, and the rainfall, just incredible watching this video, Mark. No sign of letting up anytime soon. So tell me right now, what are the major concerns in this area as they're heading into the rest of the week?
Well, I think the major concern is that you have an emergency system that is just overwhelmed with calls. So much so that these first responders have to prioritize the life and death calls that they get. So the definition of what constitutes an emergency here keeps rising with the water. For instance, you got a couple inches of water in your house and your neighbors all have the same. That's not an emergency anymore. What is an emergency is if you're up in the attic and all of a sudden you notice the water is continuing to rise and you're trapped. Now that is an emergency. So they had to try to figure out, we have a finite number of resources, we have a seemingly infinite number of people who want access to those resources. How do we make sure that the right people get the right help in the right quick time? And that is a singular challenge here. The other challenge here, Arena, is just logistics. I mean, getting from point A to point B, you know, that line, you can't get here, you can't get there from here. That's very much true here because there are so many spots in the city that are virtual islands surrounded by water, and you really have an extraordinarily difficult time making what should be a 10-minute drive, which can quickly turn into a 2-hour drive, unless you luck into some street that was maybe a little bit higher elevation, and so the floodwaters haven't completely washed it away. So lots of challenges here, and as the city wakes up to a Monday morning work week, they are facing not just an extraordinary week, but a potentially traumatic week as well, because, I mean, everybody sort of expects that the issues are going to rise, and the hope here is that the death toll does not.
I know, it is just incredible watching these images, Mark, and it just it's so devastating as well. I want to ask you, is there any criticism? Did the Democratic mayor of Houston do enough? There weren't mandatory evacuations. Are people saying that there should have been?
Well, you know, it's certainly easy to second guess these things. That was also the case, as we all know, in New Orleans with Katrina. By the time the evacuation order was given in New Orleans, it was the morning that Katrina was coming, heading to New Orleans' way, and of course by then it was too late. And so there's going to be some second guessing here. I mean, not for me to say whether the evacuation order should have been given earlier, but it is. I'll tell you this much. This is one of those disasters where they knew it was coming, so they could plan for it. So then they had to decide, okay, what sort of preemptive steps do we want to take to mitigate things, to try to minimize the pain? A lot of people are now questioning whether evacuations should have been part of that plan, and the second guessing is bound to go on, particularly in those neighborhoods where people woke up this morning and suddenly they were surrounded by water, and in some cases living in water, and wish that perhaps they had been told to get out while they still could.
And it's just the beginning. The President of the United States will travel there on Tuesday as well. Mark Strassman, thank you very much for that report.
In the nation's fourth largest city, floods are a way of life.
It's pretty scary. I've never seen anything like it.
In 2015, a Memorial Day flood racked up almost $500 million in damages. Last year, Houston led the U.S. in flood-related deaths, mostly due to an April storm that claimed 8 lives. So why is the Bayou City so vulnerable? Not only is it low-lying with many creeks and rivers, the metro area's development has exploded. One study found the Houston area has added 25% more pavement over 15 years, replacing soil-rich wetlands that could absorb water with concrete-covered suburbia.
The human development is what's really driving and exacerbating flood losses over time.
Professor Sam Brody of Texas A&M Galveston says this was the view today from his front door. He spent years researching Houston floods and says the recent increase in their severity is mostly a man-made problem.
We're adding about 100,000 people a year, and with those people come parking lots, pavement, rooftops, roadways, and that makes it very difficult for the water to drain slowly and then into the bayous, into the bay.
Houston is unique among major cities in that it has no formal zoning laws. As for other regulations, new structures here are required to be built 12 inches above 100-year flooding levels. Chuck Blank has lived in this neighborhood for 20 years, and he says he's never seen rising water like this.
We got too much concrete, I think, is what part of the problem is. The water doesn't have any place to go when something like this happens. So.
Tonight, there are still Houston neighborhood. Experts expect the metro area's population will grow by more than 3 million people over the next 3 decades, meaning this flooding problem could get even deeper.